All right.
So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Miguel. I went to Cal Poly. I graduated this past year in June. I studied kinesiology, and for all 4 years I was at Cal Poly. I was part of EPIC, so I've been in your seats before. And I'll go into what brought me here now. But I just want to give a little background about myself. I have an older sister, and my sister has had 2 kids, so I have 2 nieces. It's been fun being an uncle. They live up in Washington right now, so I like to go visit them like once or twice a year, and that's pretty cool. If you guys are familiar with Myers-Briggs, I'm an ISFP. So if you guys aren't familiar, I would say I'm more introverted than extroverted, and that might surprise some of you. But yeah, I'm introverted. I'm more of a feeler than a thinker, and I'm more spontaneous than like planning. So that's just a little bit on myself. And then for Enneagram, I'm a type 7. Type 7? Cool. And I know not everyone is a fan of like personality tests, but honestly I see it as like a conversation starter, and I don't think like an algorithm or a test can help like define me or make me understand like who I am. But I think it's just cool to give us insight to how we think and how we interact with people. Like for example, now that I know I'm a P, and like if I plan a trip, I'm more comfortable if there's like no plan, or I don't know. Yeah, maybe not more comfortable, but I don't mind. But going off of that, maybe personality tests won't make us understand who we are, but having an understanding of who God is can. So today we've been going through, or you guys have been going through, God is our blank this quarter, and today I'm going to be talking about how God is our author. Cool. And then next slide. The verse I want to go through today is Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. This is going to be an ESV, so I'll read it for us. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right throne of God. And with that, I'd like to pray us in. God, we just thank you for being a good God. Thank you for being our author, and thank you for writing our stories and being in control of everything. I was just reminded of a song that I was listening to that you're never worried, so why do we worry? And we just thank you for being in control of everything. We want to lift this night up to you. I just pray for help understanding what you have in store for us tonight in the Word, and just what you've been stirring up in my heart. And would you just be at the center of it all? I just pray that lives would be transformed. I just pray that stories would be shared and walls would be broken down, and that it would be glorifying to you. So we just lift these things up in your name. Amen. Cool. Sweet. So that's the verse I want to kind of talk about today. And this is ESV, and the part I really want to focus on is in the middle of verse 2, it says, the founder and perfecter of our faith. And in other versions, you'll see that instead of founder, it'll say author. So the author and perfecter of our faith. And I just think God as our author is such a cool theme, or just some idea to think about, because that means a lot of different things. And I want to jump into 3 main things that, like, if God is our author, what does that mean for us? So the first thing that it means is we each have a unique story. So that'll be the first main point. Because God is our author, we each have a unique story. It's a simple truth, but it's important to understand how our individual stories fit into the overarching narrative that God has for us. And it's cool because it doesn't matter if you're a freshman or a 5th year or you're working full time. It doesn't matter if you're Christian or non-Christian. It doesn't matter if you grew up going to church or you just started going recently or you don't go at all. We all have a story. And I remember my freshman year, I'm from the Bay Area, and I was going back home a lot my fall quarter, and there's this one guy who he was a third year when I was a freshman, and I really looked up to him. His name was Michael Galahi, and some of you might know him, but it's a 3.5 hour car ride, and it was just me and him in the car, and I was just getting to know him, and he asked me, like, have you ever gone through the 5 Fs? And for those of you that don't know what the 5 Fs are, it's there's faith, friends, family, finances, and females, or if you're a female, then fellas. Yeah, and I hadn't heard about what that was at that point, but as I was going through the 5 Fs, I was giving him an idea of like who I was, like what my story was. And as I was talking about it, I realized I never really thought about my story or told someone my story. This was very new to me. And as I was going through my background and my upbringing, I started to realize that I had events in my life and people in my life that shaped me to who I am. And if God is our author, whether we realize it or not, we all have had those events, those people in our life that shape us into who we are today, whether that's good or bad. So for myself, part of my background was I went to a private Christian school from 2nd grade to 8th grade, and I was born in the Philippines, and those are just like two things that I knew in my head, but I didn't realize like affected who I am today. So with that, we each have a unique story. I want to share about my story. Some people say like, oh, this is my testimony. I just think testimony is just a fancy church word for this is my story. So this is my story. I was born in the Philippines, like I said. I was born into a Christian household. I was going to church every Sunday for as long as I can remember. But I went just because that's what we did, not because I wanted to, not because I thought it was fun. It's just my parents went. I went to that private Christian school, so honestly, if anyone ever asked me, I was a Christian. But I didn't, and then when I went to high school, I didn't have any Christian friends because I was in a public school. But each summer, I'd go to this church camp for a week. And then, yeah, it was awesome because I experienced God and it showed me what community could be like. And I had encounters with God in that week. And then the other 51 weeks, I would just go through the motions. It wouldn't be bad or anything, but God wasn't a big part of my life. And then it was the summer before I came to Cal Poly. This is 4 or 5 years ago now. I realized I wanted to have community experience God more than 1 week a year. So I came into college, like many of you, looking for a Christian community that I could just do life with. I heard about Crew. I went to Club Showcase looking for Crew. I found them. And then they asked, like, oh, do you want to hear about our Asian American branch? I wanted the free swag bag. So I said, sure. And then I got my contact info. I forgot that they did that. And then I got a text that night asking if I want to go to dessert potluck. And I wasn't planning to go, but for some reason I did. And I guess that was my start pick. It was pretty much week 1. And then I was going home a lot that quarter, so I wasn't really too involved. But the first big event that happened in college was I went to the winter conference. And I'm sure you guys have been hearing about it. I highly encourage you guys to go. But there's this message that I heard that first year just talking about eternal perspective and just asking, like, what have we done for God's kingdom? And I would call myself a Christian, but I didn't know I don't know how to answer that. And then right after that message, they had a breakout session for talking about summer missions, and I thought it was just weird timing, but yeah, I ended up going to a week-long missions trip that spring. I ended up going to a summer-long missions trip the following summer, and entering discipleship, going to large group, going to church for the first time because it was my choice. I just took baby steps towards God, and I think it was at the end of my second year, I got baptized. And yeah, that's just a little bit about my background. And when I was thinking about what to talk about today and just sharing my testimony, honestly, I found it pretty uneventful. Like, I think it's pretty typical for a lot of us that we grew up going to church in a Christian household. That's not the story for all of us, definitely, but I was like, that's kind of nothing special. And I found myself wanting to have someone else's story, someone that became Christian in college, someone that gave up their job to follow God. And I felt like I didn't have that. But as I was going through this, I realized that we each have our unique story. And I feel like my story can speak to some of you, and not all of you, and then someone else's story can definitely speak to the other parts of you guys. So I've been learning to embrace my story, and if each of us have a story, I think it's just super important to know what it is. Because I didn't know what it was, or I didn't really think about it until that conversation with the 5 Fs, and like it doesn't have to be the 5 Fs, but that's where I started. So we each have a unique story because God is our author. The second main point I want to go through is because God is our author, if it's not good, it's not over. And this is the one where I really want to spend the most time, because I feel like there's people out there that need to hear this. If it's not good, it's not over. And when I was going through this point, the first thing I thought about, do you guys remember MoviePass? So 2 years ago, I had MoviePass. I like watching Marvel movies, and it was just downtown slow. I was watching Infinity War. So this is the spoiler alert if you guys haven't watched it. It's been 2 years, so if you haven't watched it, it's on you. But yeah, I'm sure a lot of us have watched it. And in Infinity War, I was hyped. Like, the heroes were coming together to fight Thanos, the bad guy. And just battle after battle, Thanos kept winning, getting all the Infinity Stones. And I'm just like, all right, like, when is the tide gonna turn? And then the final battle, like, Thanos wins and snaps his fingers and, like, everyone's gone. And then the movie ends. And then I was like, what? like the good guys are always supposed to win. And honestly, I was like, there's no way that's it. Like, there has to be more. And the reason that comes to mind is because, like, in my life personally, like, when I go through stuff, if I'm having just a rough season, I find myself like just wallowing in it, or just like, man, I don't know when it's gonna be over. Like, is this it? And I just wish I had the same mindset with, like, watching Avengers. Like, oh, there's no way that's it. There has to be more. Like, it can't end that way. But when stuff happens in my life, I'm like, oh, is that it? Or like, what's this for? And I just thought about, like, the Russo brothers watching Avengers. Like, they know how it's gonna end, and they know, like, that's not it. And I would say that they're the author of their movie. So honestly, when God is watching our stories or writing our stories and seeing things unfold, he knows how it's gonna end. And he knows that if it's not good, it's not over. He has purpose beyond the stuff we go through. And there's a story in the Bible I wanna kind of refer to. It's in Matthew 14. It's when Peter walks on water. And just to give a little bit of context, Jesus just fed 5,000 people with 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread, or I might have switched that. But he just fed a bunch of people. He performed a miracle. And he tells the disciples to go out into the water, and he'll meet up with them later. And so they go. And then a storm comes, and they're kind of freaking out, and they see Jesus walking on the water, and then he tells Peter to come out on the water and walk. And Peter does for a little bit, and then he sinks. And the reason I bring that up is because sometimes when the storms in our life come, we can sink like Peter because we don't know why it's there. But we wouldn't know about that story if there was no storm in the first place. So I believe that sometimes Jesus will send you into a storm to show you a miracle, or he'll send you into a storm to show others a miracle. But in that case, there's no miracle without the storm. So I'm sure, like, when they're in the boat freaking out about the storm, they didn't know what was gonna happen, but Jesus did. And yeah, I just want to remind you guys that if it's not good, it's not over. And I just want to, like, I'm talking to myself too, like, too often, like, when things are going great, life is going great, we want to take all the credit. So if I land an awesome new job, I'll say, like, I killed that interview, or I worked really hard for it, my resume is awesome. Or if I, like, earned a good grade on a test, I'll say I studied for it. enter into a new relationship. They could be like, oh, it's because like I'd be a good boyfriend or girlfriend. And then on the flip side, like when things aren't going good, I feel like myself, I'm so quick to blame Jesus. Like, why didn't I get that job? Why did this happen? And it's like we want the credit for the good things, and then we want to give God the credit for the bad things. Like, I think there's just an imbalance there. And I don't want to invalidate the storms in your life. Like, there are definitely things that we go through that are tough, and they're very real. Like, I'll just list off some of them, and I'm sure you or someone you know can relate. Some of the stuff we go through can be depression, anxiety, losing loved ones, not being able to find a job, not knowing what to do with a degree, feeling inadequate, feeling insecure, breakups, toxic friendships, roommate drama, financial stress, doubting in God. And by no means I don't want to invalidate anything, but I just want to remind you guys that if it's not good, it's not over. It's like the ending of Infinity War. Like, they took a fat L, but there's no way that was it. And then there's another movie where they won. And sometimes when we take a fat L, like if we're going through one of the things I just mentioned, it's so easy to think that that might be it. But there's another movie. The story will go on. And I was kind of debating about sharing this because this is a little bit embarrassing, but I just want to be vulnerable. One of the storms I went through in college was, not a lot of people know this, I was on academic probation 4 different quarters in college. So that means I spent a third of my college career on academic probation, and like that was definitely my fault, definitely. But it didn't like mean it was any easier. Like, it was pretty stressful. Like, there was one point where I wasn't sure if I was gonna get kicked out of school. And I wasn't sure why I kind of dug myself into that hole. What was God's purpose in all of this? Would I even graduate from Cal Poly? And now that I have graduated this past June, now that I was able to land a job, I can laugh about it now. But definitely when I was in the meeting with the counselors, I wasn't laughing about it. I don't think I was. But yeah, I just want to encourage you guys who are going through storms that if you're in the middle of it, it's not over. If it's not good, it's not over. He is the author of both the good things and the bad things. But either way, it should be pointing others or you back to him. All right. And the third and last point I want to go through is each part of your story has a purpose. Yeah, so each part of your story has a purpose. There's plenty of stories in the Bible. I would say the Bible is a whole narrative. Some of the stories that came to mind was Joseph. I don't know if you guys know about Joseph, but he was sold by his brothers into slavery, worked his way to the top, and then accused of something he didn't do and thrown in jail for a couple years. And we know that if we read the Bible, he ended up coming out of jail, being second in command in Egypt, and just like rising to the top. But when he was in jail for those 2 years, he didn't know that that's what was going to happen. We had the privilege of reading the Bible and knowing how the story ends, but he didn't have that at the time. They couldn't read the Bible because they were living it. So there was that. There was Jonah. A lot of people know about Jonah being eaten by a big fish. He was eaten by a big fish, swallowed, eaten, and he was in there for 3 days. And we know that he came out, but honestly, I was trying to put myself in Jonah's shoes where, like, I was in lectures and labs for 2 or 3 hours. He was inside of a fish for 72 hours. Like, I don't know what he was doing, but, and I'm sure that he didn't even have a countdown. He was in the fish probably for 48 hours, and he's like, I don't know how long I'm gonna be here. And we have the privilege of seeing how that story ends. And the last story I want to go through is about Jesus. He died on the cross, and he had loved ones and close ones that we're mourning for him and grieving for him, and we talk about his resurrection, and we celebrate that. But in that moment, I'm sure it was discouraging to see their family member, their close friend, their hero, their savior, like, take that L. So all that is to say that when we read the Bible, a lot of those stories, we see how the story ends. But at the time, they were just living it. And so when we think about our story, there are a lot of times where we're living it and we don't see the end, and that's okay. The purpose of our story is not always revealed on this side of heaven, and that's tough to swallow sometimes, but because God is our author, each part of our story has a purpose, and he has the authority to decide if and when he reveals to us why we're going through storms or why this part of our story is taking place. He's not sending us into the storm just for the sake of it. He's sending us into the storm for a purpose, to bring others to him. The purpose of our stories is so that we can glorify him and so that we can encourage others. And sometimes it'll take months or years or a lifetime to see how a story ends or unfolds. But each part of our story has a purpose. Awesome. So now we are going to be going into an activity to find out what is your story. So we're going to take some time to find out what your story is, and when we are able to figure out and discover what our story is and say it out loud, we're able to share it with people. And I feel like that's why we go through the things we do, so that we can share with people. We can talk about how God is working in that area of our life, or we can talk about how it's hard and be able to relate with someone and just take advantage of the community you guys are in. I hope that making a life map and showing it to other people and sharing it just give you a better idea of your own story, and just got to know each other better by hearing other people's stories. And during this activity, it made me think about what's been happening in my life. And I know most of you here, like even the freshmen I met, a lot of you had line dancing last week, and that was pretty awesome. But I don't know if a lot of you know like why I'm in slow, and I just wanted to share that part of the life map with you guys. So this is the current part of my life map. I graduated from Cal Poly with a degree in kinesiology, and whenever I thought about post-grad life, I always saw it as I'm gonna find a job, hopefully in the Bay, but I'm gonna find a job, then I'll find a place to live, and then I'll find a church. And luckily, during my finals week of senior year, I landed a job in Berkeley as a personal trainer at a gym up in the Bay. So I was like, awesome, that's cool, like God provided this opportunity for me. And the week before I left, I was at this conference with Vista, actually. And it was an awesome conference. It was pretty similar to like the retreats and conferences that Epic puts on. And on the last day of the conference, there's a lot of prayer happening, and this one guy comes up to me and says, hey, if you go up to the Bay and within a couple months you can't find a church community, consider coming back to Slow. And I didn't know this guy super duper well, and I was like, sure, like I'll pray about it. And then within 5 minutes, Pastor Luke, if you guys go to Vista, Pastor Luke comes up to me and he said, I was praying and I really felt like the Holy Spirit was leading me to ask you if you'd consider staying and being a part of Vista Church. And I know it's really bad timing, like you just got your job up in the Bay, you're moving next week, but would you consider that? And I was caught off guard for sure. And I said, yeah, I'll think about it. And I didn't really think about it too much. I was really set. I'm like, okay, like this is a job with my degree. I have my housing set, I have my job set. And so I moved up to the Bay the following week. And living in the Bay post-grad was cool. This new job was cool. It wasn't necessarily what I expected, but it only took 2 or 3 weeks in, I was I visited a couple of churches, listened to a couple online sermons. I couldn't find a church. And this guy said, hey, if you can't find church community within a couple months, consider coming back. And I was thinking about that. And so I call up Pastor Luke this summer, and I was like, what did you mean by consider staying and being a part of Vista Church? Like, it was kind of vague. And he said, what I was thinking was, you come back to SLO, you find a job, you show up on Sunday, you be part of a small group, and just see what Jesus will do with that. And I was basically like, all right. I talked to a couple people. I read a book, which is a lot for me. And I was talking to people, processing people, praying about it, and it just felt like God was leading me back to SLO, and I didn't know why. And so I ended up saying yes, if it's God. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm definitely more sure than not sure. And I said, okay, I'll come back to SLO. I don't know when, I don't know why, I don't know what it'll look like, but I want to say yes to God. And I told Pastor Luke because I didn't want to second guess myself. I wanted to bring someone else into it, and that's the importance of sharing your story. You have accountability. And I said, hey, Pastor Luke, I'm down to come back. And he said, awesome. I know that there's this guy at our church that's hiring. I'll see what I could do. And I was like, cool. And that same day, he connected me with a guy. I applied online for a job I have no experience in. And within a couple days, honestly, I interviewed and got the job offer. And I didn't expect this to happen so fast. This was less than a week. So I went from having a job at a gym that I was still figuring out using my degree and transitioning into a job where, honestly, it has nothing to do with my degree, but it allows me to be in SLO, and being in SLO, I felt like that's what God is writing in my story right now in this season. And I don't know why, but for those of you that are wondering, that's why I'm here. So I'm graduated, but I'm working in the area, and I'm just excited to see what God has in store for me this summer. And just that whole season made me think about my nieces, honestly. I have a picture of them up here. So the one in the cart, her name is Naomi. She turned 1 in September. And then the one in the pink jacket, the one standing up, her name's Adeline. She's only 3, and when my sister takes them to the doctor, every checkup, the doctor's like, they're in the 95th, 98th percentile for height and weight. Like, they're gonna be big. And yeah, and it's awesome when I get to visit them and play with them and hang out with them. I want to talk about Adeline. She loves ice cream, and she loves running around. And when we cross the street, I have to cross the street with her. And the whole season of my life that God was working in made me think about what would it look like if Adeline looked across the street and saw an ice cream truck. She loves ice cream, and honestly, like, I bought her ice cream before. That's what uncles can do. But if we're about to cross the street and I see a car coming, I wouldn't let her cross the street. But also, even though she's tall for a 3-year-old, she doesn't see what I see. So I could see over a car, I could see over stuff on the sidewalk and see that a car's coming, and I'll say, hey, like, no ice cream right now. Or like I wouldn't let her get the ice cream at that moment. And being the 3-year-old that she is, she's had ice cream before. She knows that it's good. She knows I bought her ice cream before. She'll wonder why. Like, it's right there, and she can't see the car coming, and it's like, she won't get why, and she could throw a fit. And a lot of times, in that instance, I feel like Adeline, where I'll see something that I want. I'll see a job or a situation that I want, and it seems good, and God is saying, hey, like, hold off. Like, you don't see what I'm doing, but this is for your own good. And yeah, so even though I was up in the Bay this summer working a job that I thought I was gonna be for a while, God said no to living in the Bay, and He said like, you're gonna stay in SLO indefinitely. So I don't know what that has in store, but that's why I'm here. Yeah, so I just want to share that with you guys. Just that's the point of my life where I'm at. Yeah, and I don't necessarily know why I'm in SLO, but it was just cool to kind of flip my mindset, because when I thought about post-grad, I always thought about like career, from there, find a place to live, from there, find a church in the area. And it was different to think about post-grad as, this is the church I want to be a part of, this is where God can use me and I can grow in community, and then trust that God will provide housing, will provide a job. And it was cool to see that He did. And it was so quick. Within saying yes to coming back to SLO, and being in SLO was a week and a half, maybe. I saw some of you guys at the bonfire in North Carolina, in the Bay Area. And at that point, I didn't know I was coming back to SLO, and then I think first week of September, I was back here. So yeah, I just want to share that with you, where we might not understand what God is doing in our life, but if we trust in Him, trust that He's our author, and trust that if it's not good, it's not over, and share our story with other people, I feel like our stories are still being written. So yeah, just want to share that with you guys. Yeah, and I just hope that with activity, you have a better glimpse of what your story is. And if you didn't get the chance to share it with someone, or you feel like you want to talk about it more, like definitely feel free to do that outside of this time. Yeah, so I'll just pray us out, and then we'll end with worship.